writing away the pain. John lived alone in a small house on the edge of a quiet town. The house was old, with creaky floors and faded curtains. Every morning John sat by the window, watching the world outside. He saw the wind move the leaves and birds fly by, but his heart was heavy, and he felt like he didn't belong in that world anymore. Years ago, John had a family. He had a wife who loved him and a life that was full of laughter. But one rainy evening, everything changed. His wife was in a car accident and she never came back. Since that day, John's life became empty. He stopped going out. He stopped talking to his friends. The world felt cold and grey without her. One afternoon, while cleaning an old drawer, John found something unexpected. It was an old notebook. The cover was worn, and the pages were blank. He brushed off the dust and held it in his hands for a moment. Memories of his wife filled his mind, and he felt a deep sadness. John sat at the table with the notebook and a pen. At first he didn't know what to write. Then he started with one sentence, "I miss you every day." The words came slowly at first, but soon they poured out. He wrote about her kindness, her laugh, and the way she used to sing while cooking. As John wrote, tears rolled down his face. But for the first time, the tears didn't feel heavy. It was as if the notebook was listening to him, taking away some of his pain. He wrote for hours, filling page after page with memories and feelings he had kept inside for years. When the sun set, John looked at the notebook. It was full of words, but his heart felt a little lighter. That night, he went to bed with the notebook on his bedside table. For the first time in a long time, John felt like he had done something good for himself. The next morning, John woke up with a strange feeling. It was not the usual emptiness he felt each day. Instead, it was a small spark of energy. He looked at the notebook on the table and felt a pull, like it was calling to him. He made his tea, sat down, and opened it again. John decided to write about the happy moments they had shared. He remembered the day he met his wife. It was a sunny afternoon at the park. She was reading a book under a tree, and John was walking his dog. The dog ran to her, and she laughed as she petted him. John smiled as he wrote about her bright eyes and the sound of her voice when she first said hello. Page after page, John filled the notebook with stories of their life together. He wrote about their first date, the silly jokes they shared, and the time they got lost on a road trip. He even wrote about the small fights they had and how they always made up with a hug. As John wrote, he began to smile. These memories, which once made him sad, now brought him comfort. He realized that writing them down kept them alive. It felt like his wife was sitting next to him, laughing at the stories and reminding him of their love. By the afternoon, John decided to take a break. He walked to the small garden behind his house. It was overgrown with weeds and wildflowers, but he didn't mind. He sat on the old wooden bench and looked at the sky. The sun was warm on his face, and for the first time in years, he felt a sense of peace. That evening, John returned to the notebook. He wrote about the last few days with his wife. It was hard, and tears fell onto the pages, smudging the ink. But he didn't stop. He knew that facing the pain was the only way to heal. When he finished, he closed the notebook and placed his hand on it, feeling a small sense of relief. The next day, John woke up earlier than usual. The air felt fresh, and the morning sunlight streamed through his window. He stared at the notebook on his desk. It had become more than just a place for his memories. It felt like a bridge to his wife, a way to connect with her spirit. John decided to write about a special tradition they had. Every Sunday morning they would bake bread together. His wife loved the smell of fresh bread filling the house. John smiled as he remembered her laughter when the dough got stuck to his hands. She would always tease him, saying, "You're better at eating bread than making it." He described the sound of her humming while she worked and how they would sit by the window, enjoying warm slices of bread with honey. Writing these moments felt like living them again. Each word brought back her warmth and the joy they had shared. As the hours passed, John realized something unexpected. He didn't feel alone while writing. His wife's memories filled the empty space in his heart, giving him strength. The sadness was still there, but it was softer now, less sharp. After finishing a few more pages, John looked around the house. It felt quiet and empty, but he no longer wanted to stay in silence. He decided to visit the town library. His wife used to love going there, and it was a place filled with their shared memories. At the library, John wandered through the rows of books. The smell of old pages reminded him of the times they spent reading together. He picked a book she used to love and sat down to read. As he turned the pages, he felt a sense of connection, as if she were reading alongside him. When he returned home that evening, he placed the library book on the table beside his notebook. Looking at them together, John felt something new. It wasn't just sadness anymore. It was hope, a small light in the darkness. The following morning, John sat at his desk again. The notebook was open, and the pen rested in his hand. This time he wrote about their trips to the park. His wife loved feeding the birds. She would always bring a bag of seeds, and the birds would gather around her. "They trust you," John had told her once. She had laughed and replied, "Kindness attracts kindness." He remembered how her smile lit up the park and how her voice carried warmth, even to strangers. Writing these moments brought John peace. For the first time in months, he felt like he could hear her voice again, soft and comforting, as if she were standing right behind him. After finishing his story, John closed the notebook and decided to visit the park. He bought a small bag of seeds on the way. When he reached the park, the memories of their time together flooded back. He found their favourite bench, sat down, and scattered the seeds on the ground. The birds came quickly, hopping around his feet. John smiled as he watched them. It was almost as if his wife was there, laughing at the playful birds. He felt her presence in the breeze that brushed past him, gentle and soothing. A woman sitting on a nearby bench noticed John feeding the birds. She smiled and said, "They seem to like you." John chuckled, feeling a spark of joy he hadn't felt in a long time. He replied, "My wife taught me how to befriend them." They began talking. The woman, Clara, shared that she often came to the park to paint. She carried a sketchbook filled with drawings of nature and birds. John shared some of his stories about the park and his wife. It felt good to talk to someone, to share his memories aloud. That evening, when John returned home, he wrote in his notebook again. This time he wrote about the birds, the park, and meeting Clara. He realized that life could still hold small surprises, even in the shadow of his loss. It wasn't about forgetting, it was about finding new ways to keep moving forward. The next day, John felt a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He returned to the park, carrying his notebook with him. Clara was there, sitting on the same bench with her sketchbook. She waved at him, and he walked over to join her. "I brought my notebook," John said, holding it up. Clara smiled and said, "Maybe we can share our work." John hesitated for a moment, then opened his notebook. He read a passage about his wife's love for the park and the birds. His voice wavered, but Clara listened attentively. When he finished, Clara showed him a drawing she had made. It was of a bird sitting on a tree branch, surrounded by leaves. "Your story inspired this," she said. John felt a warm glow in his chest. For the first time, his words had touched someone else's life. They spent hours sharing stories and drawings. Clara spoke about her late husband, who had encouraged her to start painting. She said she found peace in her art, just as John was finding peace in his writing. Their conversations were filled with memories, laughter, and a shared understanding of loss. That evening, John wrote about his day in the park. He described Clara's drawings and how they made him see the world differently. He wrote about their conversation and how it felt to connect with someone who understood his pain. His words flowed easily, and his heart felt lighter with each sentence. Over the next few weeks, John and Clara met at the park almost every day. They encouraged each other to keep creating. John wrote stories inspired by the park, the birds, and his time with Clara. Clara filled her sketchbook with vibrant images of nature and memories. One day, Clara suggested an idea. "What if we share our work with others?" she asked. John was surprised but intrigued. He had never thought about sharing his stories beyond his notebook. "Maybe," he said, smiling. For the first time, he felt that his words might have a purpose beyond himself. A few weeks later, John and Clara decided to organize a small event in the park. They invited people from the neighborhood to come and share their stories or listen. John was nervous as the day approached, but Clara encouraged him. "Your words have meaning, John. Let others hear them," she said. On the day of the event, the park was filled with people. Some brought notebooks, others brought paintings, and many simply came to listen. John stood at the front, holding his notebook tightly. He took a deep breath and began reading one of his stories. His voice trembled at first, but as he spoke, he felt more confident. The audience listened quietly, some nodding, others smiling. When he finished, they clapped warmly. John felt a wave of emotion wash over him. For so long he had kept his feelings hidden, but now he had shared them with strangers, and they understood. Clara also shared her art. She held up her sketches and explained the inspiration behind each one. Her drawings of birds, trees, and people touched everyone in the park. Together, John and Clara showed how creativity could bring healing and connection. After the event, people approached John to thank him. One woman said, "Your story reminded me of my late husband. It brought back good memories." A young man said, "I've been afraid to write about my feelings, but now I want to try." John realized that his words had not only healed him, but also inspired others. He began to see writing as more than just a way to escape his pain. It was a way to connect with the world. From that day forward, John continued writing and sharing his stories. The park became a place of community and hope, where people came together to express themselves. And every time John picked up his pen, he felt closer to his wife, knowing she would be proud of the man he was becoming.